Welcome back, everyone, to the Thursday edition of Sportscall. Andy Graham here with you for another hour and a half, taking your phone calls at 1-888-9-TIGER-9 toll-free or locally at 334-887-3401. We'll pick up your phone calls in the next segment, but right now we're thrilled to welcome in Larry Weitzman, the director of SEC Storied, Bo Barkley, and the Big Hurt. Larry, how you doing today?
Hey, doing well. Great to be with you. Thank you.
We really appreciate you joining us. I know everybody that I've talked to is just can't wait to see this thing tonight, that Bo Barkley and the Big Hurt that premieres on the SEC Network at 8 o'clock Central Time. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, how you got involved in this project.
So I worked for NBA Entertainment doing original programming for the National Basketball Association for many years, and then went out on my own. I do a lot of work with Hawk Films. John Hawk is a tremendous director. He was executive producer of this film, and he's done, The Best That Never Was and Through the Fire, a whole bunch of the 30 for 30s, great guy. And ESPN came to us with the idea, it was ESPN's idea, to capture this time in Auburn history where these three legends, tremendous players who came to be the face of their sport at Auburn, one right after the other. And then it was just a lot of fun to do the film. Charles I had worked with back in my NBA days. It was the first time I got to work with Bo and with Frank, and they're great storytellers. The highlights are fantastic. I mean, you couldn't ask for better subject matter.
How much did you know about Charles, Bo, and Frank before getting involved in this, and maybe what did you learn that you didn't already know?
It's funny. One of the first thoughts was, gosh, these guys have been covered so extensively. Is there any new ground? And as it turned out, there really is. Their Auburn years, the way they talk about Auburn is really interesting. They were true student athletes there. They loved the university, and their years there, they have great stories. Charles tells a story about how the basketball team would come in to eat in the mess hall, whatever you want to call it, and they'd serve them, pizza, burgers, hot dogs. And then the football team would come in, and they'd get pushed out, and in came the steak and the lobster, and so he'd be back at the dorm, and they'd be ordering more pizzas back at the dorm. They shared a dorm with the football team, and then the football team would come out and eat all their pizzas anyway. So, silly stories, but stories when you hear these Hall of Fame athletes talking about their college days with this sort of fondness and the sort of silly back and forth, it really shows a different side of them. It's kind of interesting.
Well, Auburn fans know these guys better than anybody growing up with them. Many of these three guys being their heroes growing up. It's kind of a pretty incredible thing that that these three Hall of Fame type athletes came through Auburn University relatively at the same time. And now they've gone on to be, these world-known, world-famous athletes. Was the logistics of it, trying to bring this all together to get them all into one place at one time, was that challenging?
It was challenging. They're all very busy guys. And so that's, one of the reasons we targeted the Iron Bowl, because Charles and Bo go every year. Frank tries to go as much as he can, but this year actually he had a conflict. But when we went to him and said, look, the other two guys are going to be there. We want to shoot this film there. Can you figure it out? And he changed all his plans and got there. And so we got all three of them there. And then, of course, we got lucky that it turned out to be, the Iron Bowl, one of the greatest college football games of all time. So, it was like the big three come together and magic happens again.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. This whole documentary uses the Iron Bowl, the 2013 Iron Bowl, as the backdrop. And that's got to be one of the greatest twists of fate in cinematic history. Or maybe, you being the director, did you have some kind of influence on the outcome? If you did, we really do appreciate it.
That's right. If I had that kind of influence, I'd be in a different line of business. But yes, that was pure dumb luck, and we'll take it. And it was great because, Charles was on, obviously College Game Day was there on campus, and Charles was a guest. He gave the pregame speech. Bo gave a speech, and led the War Eagle chant post game. It was Bo's birthday. They gave him this big old birthday cake at halftime. So it just, it did seem like fate how it all kind of came together.
Well, as the director, what was your vision for this project? What did you want the finished product to be?
We really wanted to do justice to that time. There have been stories of sort of golden ages at various universities. But Auburn, this period of time, Charles, Bo, and Frank, overlapping to some degree, but in quick succession, really is one of the greatest times in college sports history. And we really want to do it justice, for Auburn fans, but for sports fans in general to understand what a special time this was.
Well, absolutely. I know we've got Larry Weitzman here, director of SEC Story, Bo Barkley, and The Big Hurt. It is a tremendous story. It was a tremendous time in college athletics. As it premieres tonight on the SEC Network at 8 p.m., did you learn anything? Well, Auburn fans knowing these guys so well, are there going to be things in this story tonight, in this documentary tonight, that is going to surprise even the Auburn fans?
I hope so. They tell some really fun stories. There were a few things that I didn't know. I didn't know that as great a player as Frank Thomas was, as great a high school baseball player as he was, that he was not drafted by a single major league team because they assumed he was going to play football because he was so big. Ends up going to Auburn on a football scholarship. Pat Dye actually said, as a tight end prospect, he thinks he's the most talented tight end prospect he ever saw. And then Frank decided to walk on to the baseball team. And so Hal Baird and Pat Dye got together and agreed that he could walk on. And of course, the guy walks onto the baseball field and he's hitting moonshots. And Frank ended up getting hurt playing football until he moved over to baseball full time. Pat Dye let him stay on a football scholarship all the years he was there. Even though he didn't play football anymore, he played baseball, he still kept him on scholarship. I can't even imagine that happening today.
You said you had worked with Charles Barkley before. He is undoubtedly the biggest personality of the group. He is really kind of an original. He speaks his mind. Just talk a little bit about him and maybe the times that you've worked with him before.
Charles, as you said, is completely unfiltered. And I think that's sort of what people like about him so much, because what you see is exactly what you get. That is who Charles is. Whether the camera's on or the camera's off, that's Charles. He's always interesting. He does like to be provocative. He's playful, but he also speaks really from the heart. And I thought what was interesting in this film is sort of how vulnerable he allows himself to be. He talks about how he was recruited. Nobody really recruited him until his senior year, when he had a huge game against Bobby Lee Hurt, who was the big high school prospect at that time, who went to Alabama. He talks about the conflicts he had with Sonny Smith. Charles was probably 6'4", 300 pounds at that point, and Sonny wanted him to lose weight and ran him really hard, set up trash cans, in the gym for when Charles threw up because he was pushing him so hard. And, Charles was so upset, he told Sonny, "I'm leaving, I'm transferring to Alabama." So he almost left, and sort of what they went through and, how they had a meeting of the minds, and then saying, looking back, he feels Sonny was right to have pushed him and he wished he had listened more. So, everybody knows the sort of bombastic, funny Charles, and there's plenty of that, but I think the sort of more vulnerable Charles is interesting to see here.
Yeah, there's three really distinct personalities. You have Barkley, who's kind of, like you said, just bombastic, just overblown. He says exactly what he wants to say. Then you have Bo Jackson. He's kind of been, although he was in the spotlight when his playing career, he's kind of stepped back. He's not in the spotlight near as much. The difference in personalities, I'm sure, come through this documentary. And just talk about the differences between Bo, Barkley, and Frank.
Yeah. So, Charles, we talked about Bo had a stuttering problem when he was younger. And so you didn't hear as much from him. And then you had that big sort of Bo Knows campaign. And You start to see a little bit more of his personality. It's really interesting because he's very well-spoken. You don't get a hint of the stutter anymore at all. He's a great storyteller, and has a really engaging personality. As I said, you've seen him in commercials and you've seen him in short bits, but when he talks, he has this quiet presence that really comes across. Very compelling storyteller, in a quieter way than Charles, but no less commanding. And Frank, he's this big guy, but he's got a huge smile on his face, loves to have fun. He's a big personality in his own right, but what's funny is when he's with the other two, he kind of defers to them a little bit and ends up becoming the straight man for them to, sort of play off of. They have a really interesting dynamic when the three of them play off each other. You can tell that they're old friends, but that they still, as if they were still kids, kind of needling each other a little bit. It's a fun dynamic.
Well, I certainly cannot wait to this documentary tonight, Bo Barkley and the Big Hurt. We've got Larry Weitzman here, the director of that. Just one final question. There's kind of an old argument at Auburn between the three players, really, I think, about who the best athlete ever to come out of Auburn really is. Most people would probably say Bo Jackson. Do you have an opinion on the matter?
It's funny. We get into that in the show, and the three guys actually talk about it. And Charles proclaims that he's number one.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And Bo basically says, you don't want to argue with Charles, so he lets him think that, And Frank's just happy. He says, they sort of kid Frank that with Cam Newton, maybe he slipped to 4, but then Charles says, no, Cam wasn't there long enough, Frank. We're going to keep you at 3. So.
Well, again, Larry Weitzman here, director of the SEC Story, Bo Barkley and the Big Hurt. We can't thank you enough. We're all looking forward to this on the SEC Network tonight. It premieres at 8 o'clock Central Time. I know everybody's going to be watching it. Larry, we really appreciate you joining us on Sportscall this afternoon.